All right, we'll move on to topic number two, which is workforce impact. And I'll direct this question at Jeff, John, and Aaron. We can take turns here, but the rule aims to improve caregiver compensation and care quality. How do you think this will impact Medicaid and private pay providers? And are there other alternative solutions? So, Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I I really appreciate what Aaron said, coming from the perspective of being a private pay provider and not wanting to put his head in the sand about this, because whatever we do with the workforce in the Medicaid world is going to inherently impact the private pay world. They will have to maintain or keep up with whatever happens to Medicaid. I like Ari had mentioned before, I think that as we increase the compensation capability and the prestige of working as a caregiver in the country, that will have a positive impact upon care quality. I think that that's a real thing. I just think that private pay providers, we are going to have to make sure that we're educating our clients and their families that the cost of care is going to increase commensurate with the changes in the labor force as a result of not only this rule but just generally speaking. We're going to be increasing the caregiver compensation over the next 6 years for sure. Uh, so I think from a labor standpoint, this could be a good thing to attract more individuals into the home care space and increase the quality of care by virtue of the fact that we can require and request more training, more skills. Those kinds of things are a positive, a net positive. In terms of alternate solutions, I feel like knowing a little bit of this history is, so this was the brainchild of Director Tsai, who oversees Medicaid, but he came from the state of Massachusetts, and he was the director of Medicaid services in the state of Massachusetts and attempted to introduce something like the 80/20 rule in Massachusetts, and that he never got that through and implemented because it just wasn't workable under the Medicaid program in the state of Massachusetts, which is really funny that it ends up getting done federally. But one of the ways this does work is if you're a union, the most success of getting caregivers to be unionized has been through a CDC option, a consumer directed care option, as opposed to the traditional agency model. And so an 80/20 model could actually function in a CDC. The consequence is that all of the consumers of home care become de facto employers and they have to oversee their own care. So there is definitely some quality concerns from that perspective. But if I'm a union guy and really wanting to see more unionization happening within the workforce, I love this rule because it might end up pushing more states to consider a CDC option, and that becomes an alternative, not one that, by the way, I'm a fan of in any way, shape, or form, but that is an alternative of a way to be able to deal with this particular proposal.
Appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Jeff. John, thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple of things from a provider standpoint, and this has already been stated by multiple people. I think the number of agencies getting into Medicaid is going to decrease until we get an understanding of how this exactly works. I mean, if you're getting into the home care industry, private pay is way more appealing right now, right? Medicaid's just, it has a lot of unknowns. There'll be some people who do it, but I think it's unlikely that there's the same amount that there currently is. I also think it's going to cause there to be a decrease in kind of hybrid agencies that are doing, maybe some variation of a split between private duty and, Medicaid. There's a lot of agencies out there that currently do that. I think you're going to see that decrease as well. And what that means for the workforce is, so you're going to have, and it depends, right? It varies so much. In Pennsylvania, in our one region, we're getting less than $20 an hour. So then I call somebody else up in Massachusetts getting close to $50 an hour. I mean, their caregivers are getting paid more there, 50% more pay there than we're even able to bill at our bill rate. So it's really hard to figure out how to handle that. And I think you're going to see an even bigger struggle over getting caregivers attracted to your company, where the reimbursement rate for Medicaid is similar to what the private pay rate is, right? So if private pay is around $35 an hour, Medicaid is around $35 an hour, there used to be a lot bigger gap between what caregivers are paid from a private pay and Medicaid standpoint. You're going to have that gap kind of taken away. in places like that. Where there's a larger variance between private pay and Medicaid reimbursement rate, it's still going to exist, right? So the other thing that I think is really going to be interesting here is to kind of look at I don't know if anybody else deals with this in their industry, but we deal with like, I'm kind of like fly-by-nighters. We have these startup home care agencies, which I am all for. Like, if you can make your company work and do well, good. Like, we want more competition. Competition increases quality, right? But we have companies that come in a lot of cases, and we figured out kind of what our max rate in, and it's almost like trying to get into the area. It's a loss leader, right? They're coming in and they're way overpaying, and you know that they're losing money every single hour for the shifts that they're staffing, right? Well, I think that goes away with 80/20 goes into effect, even with the number of exceptions. The door's already been open for exceptions. I think once you open that door, it's going to get opened even more and more. You have training and travel. I think there's going to be some other things added into the exceptions or exclusions, whatever you want to call them. But the amount of loss leaders, it's going to go away. I believe it's going to level the playing field. Everyone's going to basically be forced to maximize and pay 80% to their caregivers, right? So if we're all in the same state with the same reimbursement rate, the chances of us paying our caregivers the same right now it's not that likely. But when we're forced to pay that 80%, most agencies are going to be paying the same pay rate to caregivers. So I think the positive of that is you're going to not lose caregivers from people coming in and poaching over it. We'll pay you an extra 25 cents an hour or $1 an hour, whatever it may be. And the companies that actually are run well and quality run companies are the companies that are going to attract and retain the caregivers. So I think that's a positive that's going to come from it. And then alternative solutions, I expect to see a diversification in what services you're offering that's outside of anything Medicaid related, right? So looking at, I know some people do some different things with nurse management, some different things like that. Maybe there's just some more concierge type services out there that you're going to have to offset your profit margin somehow. So you're going to have to look at doing things like that where you diversify your services. And then lastly, I kind of fit into this is, we have 6 years. Let's say that this doesn't get changed. We have 6 years to roll this out. 80% is going to be going to our caregivers. We're also told at the same time that fraud is running rampant in Medicaid, and we want to make sure that we crack down on fraud. Well, how do you crack down on fraud? Typically with more oversight. How do you have more oversight? You have to invest in either people to oversee things or technology to oversee things. Those both cost money. Those are both in your 20% currently. So we have this issue here where it's kind of talking out of both sides of their mouths. We want more people to get care, but we also want fraud to be decreased. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how to make it work. How do we be more efficient? And I think that's where we can start to leverage technology, particularly AI. I know it's a buzzword right now, but how do we use that to maybe grow our goal is to grow our caregiver workforce by 30 to 40% over the next 6 years, but only increase our management level by 5 to 10% in order to track closer to that 80/20. How can we do that? We have to become more efficient because the money is going to the workforce. So we have to leverage technology, and we're very interested in figuring how all of that works. So there's a lot of information I just threw out there, but those are my thoughts on the workforce impact.
Great feedback. Thank you, John. All right, let's move over to Aaron. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with what both Jeff and John said. I think, when I first saw this, I felt that it was pushing the direct to consumer piece. I just don't see how companies are able to provide quality care with the model. The math just doesn't work in my head, and I'm not a math genius, but it just doesn't work, especially if you are, like John said, if you are overseeing your employees, if you're making sure that they are giving good care, that there's not fraud, all those things. To get that in a 20% margin is impossible in my opinion. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that direct care setup, and I think you're going to see a lot of companies either say, hey, this isn't for us, or we're going to move to different models, whether it's we're going to focus on VA, we're going to focus on private pay, we're going to focus on care management, whatever that is. And from a private pay standpoint, I think it's going to affect our wages as well. And if we think about that, what that means is, you know, I see a lot of private pay companies that were very worried about Amazon or McDonald's, or, you know, companies like that that aren't in our industry, that, you know, we're setting rates of, hey, we're starting you at $20 an hour or whatever. And this is, to me, this is more concerning. It's in our industry, and a lot of private pay people aren't seeing it that way, right? But it is going to affect the wages that we provide. And you know, from a private pay standpoint, we're able to say, okay, well, here's what we're going to charge people. But I would say the majority of us didn't get in this to only care for the top 1%. And so not only is this going to affect Medicaid, it's also going to affect that middle class individual who saved, you know, X amount of dollars to be cared for. But now, because our rates have had to go up to make sure that we're paying employees, you know, the wage that is being defined by the market, we're not able to care for those individuals anymore. We're only able to care for the millionaires and the and that's just not fair. And it goes back to access to care. It's not allowing access to care for all the individuals, not just Medicaid. It's going to affect across the board, and that's going to be the big issue. And so, like it was said earlier, I think there needs to be on our end as providers, we may have to look at how we are charging. You know, do we have to go away from the hourly rate to a, you know, fee for service, and what does that look like, and how do we make that work? And I think, you know, luckily we have some bright individuals who are you know, able to be a part of think tanks and things, and be led by individuals like Jensen Jones. That's a plug, ladies and gentlemen. But but I mean, I think this is where we have to get together, and we have to be a community. We have to be strong together to say, how do we make this work? If what is that, HR 114, if that doesn't go across to stop this, we have to make it work. And so we have to think outside of the box, and we have to figure that out. And I think we have some pretty smart people that can. And so I think we're gonna have some interesting conversations to figure out how to grow our industry, which is going to be fun.
Thank you, Aaron. Let's
Okay.
open it up to the rest of the panel.
Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I jump in to disagree with
Yeah.
a couple of things that have been said? Because it's always more interesting and fun, right? If we
Absolutely.
So-
We'll open it up. Go ahead, Ari.
Awesome. John, you said that, you know, you welcome competition, great for everyone to open up their own home care. I actually think our industry structure, with the absurdly low barriers to entry, capital, regulatory, you know, I think has really held us back. I think it's held us back in terms of presenting united front with regulators and policymakers. I think it's held us back in terms of organizations having resources to invest besides just trying to get through the next payroll. So I'd love some degree of consolidation to actually happen. It's like talked about as consolidation. There's been no consolidation. I mean, for every 50 acquisitions that happen in a year, 1,000 new companies, you know, arise. And so you have 950 new companies, you know, and that much more fragmentation. Rick, you mentioned, you know, Medicaid companies getting more into private pay. I think there are different core capabilities for organizations. There are very few family resource home care companies. There are very few Abrio companies that, you know, can do both well. I think most are really good at Medicaid, really good at private pay, and they have different core capabilities. I don't see a lot of companies doing a great job of being able to do both effectively. So maybe I'm wrong on that. I do have a question for Jeff on the direct to consumer model, because I know you're a student of these things. Have we seen data that that care is not as good when it is the direct to consumer model in the Medicaid world?
So the key word there that you said, Ari, is data. And because none of this has been reported up to a central repository for collection of quality measures, part of this rule, part of the good part of this rule is to create quality measures that are standardized across all 50 states and that are sent in to one central repository so they can actually track it. So what we do have is anecdotal data saying that if under a CDC model where there is no clinical oversight, that there is a higher likelihood of mismatch of care plan with caregiver skill set, less supervision over quality, less supervision over complaints, issues, incidences, falls, medication errors, et cetera. The list could go on and on. And so do we have the data set? No, not yet. But it does stand to reason that that would be the case. And I'm a believer that in 3 years, when the cost reporting begins and that information starts to become more ubiquitously collected in a similar fashion and then reported up through CMS, that it's going to reveal both the true benefits that HCBS is bringing to the populations that we're serving. You know, the coup de grace of CMS, where we have functional limitations and 2 or more comorbidities. I mean, that's our bread and butter, and that's the group that everyone wants to solve for. And I think we provide a lot of really powerful quality improvement on that group, and that we're finally going to have the data to be able to show that. And then they will have that because those CDC models are still under the cost reporting and the quality reporting metrics. We will be able to cross compare those 2 groups, and I think it will be very, very revealing. I'm not necessarily saying the CDC is completely a bad thing. I think it works really well in situations where you have, a sick or developmentally delayed kiddo with a family member who's willing to stay home and then they can get paid through the state and et cetera. I think that that's a great model for that kind of a circumstance. But the vast majority of consumers don't have the luxury of that kind of close, intimate stakeholder. And so they're going to need somebody who creates a motivated care model like what we do as agencies. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other feedback from the panel?
I'll just make one comment that hitchhikes on what a lot of people are saying here. Part of the workforce challenge is pure demographics. There are simply not enough people working in our industry to meet the increasing demands of an aging population. And this isn't new. We've been working on this since 2005 at Leading Home Care, the Home Care CEO Forum. We've been working on it since 2017. And so we continue to study that. You and I, Jensen, when we first came together, it was focusing on caregiver recruiting and retention, and particularly 90-day retention. So we've spent a lot of time looking at the implications of this. And so part of the workforce issue is, how do local companies attract and retain the caregivers that they need when there simply aren't enough out there? So the very best caregivers are already happily working for someone else, and companies need to compete for those best caregivers. The second level, I think, happens at the local and regional level, where companies come together with the state in many cases, to create workforce development programs, CNA training schools, trade schools that train home care workers to attract younger people into healthcare in general and home care specifically as a place to work. And then the third is sort of the macro issue. And several of you have mentioned that one of the things that this rule does is put the spotlight on home care. And I think it does create that opportunity for more visibility, and for legislators and regulators and policy influencers to help get the message out that there's a huge need for home care, that older adults clearly would prefer to receive care at home. It's more economical for the Medicaid programs. And so how do we create an economic model where companies can attract caregivers, pay them a reasonable wage? Jensen, you and I did a lot of research around economically fragile caregivers and the impact when caregivers are at that edge of economic fragility. So there's lots of issues coming out of this that are going to create potential solutions. It's never going to go away because just pure demographics mean we're always going to have a need for more caregivers than physically exist, but it's a step in the right direction.
Right. And John, you had feedback as well?
Yeah, just to kind of comment, I guess, back on Ari's comment. So I agree that the barrier of entry is low in this industry, and I do think that it's had some issues with, you know, holding us back overall. But I would much rather increase the standards of the industry, what people need to do, increase that, raise the barrier of entry, if you will, and increase the quality of the companies, and not deter people because of the financial status. Maybe deter people because of the requirements and the quality that's needed, but not because it's not going to work from a 80-20%, right? So maybe you have people that are smaller, right, but get them into the industry, and if you're good, you're going to make it work and figure out how to make it work. And 80-20 is really going to make it unappealing to do that. But if you're a quality company, you don't have the 80-20 rule, you raise the barrier to entry, that's a good thing. I think we all would agree that that's a good thing because we need more quality companies out there and less fraud. But I don't like financially deterring people. I'd rather deter people because they don't want to be a quality agency. So just a thought on that.
Well said.
Thanks. All right, Rick, did you have
Jeff,
something?
I just wanted to create one more distinction to piggyback on Jeff's examples. You know, in the CDC model, Arizona implements that significantly, and there's fewer eyes on, increasing the potential for neglect and abuse that occurs for the people receiving services. And so the more eyes on, the better, and that costs a little bit of money. And that's one of the items they pay for. With the 80-20 rule, I don't know how you continue to do all that same case management.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.